What I would say to someone who wants to start writing, start. My name is Lora Atwiine. I'm a writer, director, producer from Uganda. Opportunities are here. If you have an idea, put it down. My first script, actually, I wrote it on a pen with a paper and a pen. That's before I even got to know about the softwares, the computers, the what. One of my hobbies is watching people. There are people that are talking about the same thing using the same language, but they will express it differently. The first thing I do is to make sure that I'm basing this character on someone I know in and out. Then I can add in a few other things to obviously spice it up. When you're doing something and you reach that point where you're like, I can't, stop. Take a walk. If it's still the same, then just let it go. Start something else if you must. Get your butt off that chair or do something. Make sure it is something that works for you, and then you see if it doesn't change your life. My name is Lora Atwiine. I'm a writer, director, producer from Uganda. Opportunities are here. What I would say to someone who wants to start writing, well, start. It's as simple as that. I have an idea, write it down. The formats and the technicalities of how to write come later. Those things come later. If you have an idea, put it down. My first script, actually, I wrote it on a pen with a paper and a pen. That's before I even got to know about the softwares, the computers, the what. So, tandika, that's it. That's what I can say. And then there's going to be a lot of people who will be like, I don't have a computer and I don't have a phone. These days, everyone has a smartphone. And these smartphones have a lot of softwares. It doesn't necessarily have to be the softwares I have talked about. There's a lot of softwares. When you Google, just ask. There are many. Even Celtics itself, for example, has a software which works on online. I remember, on phones. My students, at least most of them, when I was still teaching last year, used to use them. There is, when you write, because you can't be in a taxi, you're driving and this conductor starts screaming, and then the conductors have those very ridiculous comments which they throw in, and it will blow your mind and it will bring up this idea, and before you know it, so start typing. Then when you're done with your idea, that's when you can start looking now for people who know how to write a script professionally. Then they can give you pointers on how to make it look like a professional script. But the one thing I can tell anyone who wants to start writing now is start. A paper and a pen will do. I encourage people to write character profiles. When you do, then you see the things that work and the things that don't, because you will get a very crazy character. Add it in. It's like being in a lab. There are some things you add in and they just blow. Or you just add in some things and the character is just so dull. So it's a blend of both. But then when you write it down in a character profile, then you'll see the things that work and the things that don't. Because I also realized in these years I've been writing, just like humans, when we experience life, we experience it based on the things we have gone through ever since we were born. You will make a decision on what you want to eat depending on the last meal you had, or that meal that reminds you of whatever place you're going to have it in, or that meal that is going to remind you of your mom and for some weird reason she's on your mind. So whatever decisions we make in the present are based by what we went through in the past. So that's where character profiles and character bios come into play. But the first thing I do is to make sure that I'm basing this character on someone I know in and out. Then I can add in a few other things to obviously spice it up. That's my thing. I don't know how anyone else does it, but that's my thing. How to not get the characters speak the same way? It still goes through. One of my hobbies is watching people, especially in a crowd. There are people that are talking about the same thing using the same language, but they will express it differently. These days, I also meet that a lot in the scripts when I'm working with young writers, where there are tiny little things that put us apart when it comes, say, for example, to age or to social class. Children who went to, say, for example, international schools have a way they refer to things differently from the way someone who went to a local church school does. Something as simple as a child, when in vocabulary, we have the word kid, then we have child, but it all means the same. So it depends on your background. You see how it still goes back to the past of this specific person. So depending on your background, the things you went through, and the age, you cannot find mothers calling a kid a kid. I can do that now. We are in they call it a .com era. Gen Z and X and millennials. They will say kid, but this one will say child, I was in a conversation recently with a few, I think it was last year or something, where I received a script, and the writer referred to a saucepan, a pan, on a gas stove as a pot. And the first time I saw pot, I was like, what? And then I Googled, and the pot was a pot. Now saucepans are pots. So those tiny little things, as a writer, you have to be aware of them. Then you can know, depending on the social background and the character profile you have given this person, then you know if it's someone who has gone to an international school, or someone who was raised in the capital city, or someone who has, it's like right now, if you get to see the distinctions between, we are all in Kampala, in the capital city, but a child who was raised in Kololo sounds very different from a child who was raised in Tinda. Mark you, both those areas are very high-end areas. They are like for rich people, for lack of a better word. So those are things as a writer that you need to allow yourself to see and to be aware of, have like a split personality sort of situation. Because when you're writing these characters, we just finished a very amazing television series a few years ago, and I lived with over, I think up to like 50 characters in my head for 3 years. But every time I would be writing for specific characters, I would know this one is going to either, every 2 words, they click their tongue. Every 2 words, Then there will be one who they push their hair back. Then there will be these ones. Then there will be the guy who's like, So you kind of need to be aware of those things because you create them. It's fiction, because I deal mostly with fiction. You create them, so you have to sort of see them through and then make sure that's one character's thing and the other character's thing is something different. So that's how I manage to sort of separate them and make sure I pay homage to all these things and not get them confused. It is as simple as when we started an interview, right now, this interview, the first thing you are very curious about is who I am, what I do. So in the first act, it is very imperative for you to introduce your characters and introduce the life they've been in, the life they are used to. That's, I think, what they call the premise. The life they've been used to, and that one thing that makes them either question the life they've known all their lives or is going to force them to change to either survive or give up. So in writing terms, we have introducing characters, introducing the premise, setting the goals of these characters, If the story is Lucky is a single woman who is lonely, and the one thing that is going to change is she wants to go out there and find the love of her life, for example. The question is, what is she going to do to find that thing that she thinks now she needs in order to be able to fulfill that void that she has in her life? So that's it, introducing characters, the premise, and the one thing that is very important, which sort of takes the rest of the story forth, it's what we call the hook, the inciting incident. If you're reading a book, if you're watching a movie, or even if someone is telling you a story, I'll tell you, Navude Waka came home and drove all the way up to here. There's nothing exciting here. But if I start the story with, guess what? So I left home. Just as I'd made the corner, and I'm on a phone call, and I drop off the phone call, you will call me to figure out what was on that corner. You know, that's the inciting incident. You'll be like, what happened? Because you're curious. So if you're writing a book, or even if you're even making conversation with people, there's that thing that changes everything, that makes you super excited about the story. It's what we call the hook. So yeah, those are three things that if I'm either reading a script or maybe watching a film, because I watch a lot of films, too many. Those are the things I look forward to, and those are the things I try to pass on to my students, because I feel those are the things that make a starting of a good story. The second act is very tricky. It's fun to some extent, because it's like, first of all, it's fun, and then it's not, because the second act is the longest. But then it becomes too tricky, because as a writer, you have to figure out how to make these long things and put them into actually be exciting. So, in life, I use a lot of metaphors when I'm explaining. So in life, when, say, for example, the initial story which I talked about, woman is lonely, wants to find love, in life, we usually get distracted from our goals. You're like, me, I want to be a filmmaker. I'm going to turn the world upside down. Then you have your first gig and it's really amazing. Then just as your second gig is around the corner, a politician comes to you and is like, Lucky, you're going to be the best politician ever. Me, I have the money. I am going to put money in you. But you can't do both. Then they'll bring a bag of money and they'll throw it in your face, and then the other cast script which you are waiting for to direct somehow is not maturing. And then you're like, I can actually go be a politician. You would just campaign for 3 weeks. By the 3 weeks, I'll be back. Now you get sidetracked from the goal that you set yourself. Meanwhile, no one came and said, Lucky, be an actor. No, you're like, me, this is what I want. So we get sidetracked a lot from our path, and then it's later that we realize, this is giving me a lot of money. Yes, say for example, I've become a politician and I am, amazing at it, but it does not fulfill me. Then you find yourself now going back to that moment where you have all the money you want in the world, but then for some weird reason, something goes on TV and you watch it, and then all of a sudden you have this thought, Kale, that's the film I wanted to direct 10 years ago, So I've literally given you the second act. What usually happens the second act, which makes these stories very exciting, is the character's main goal being established very well in the first act. And then in the process of them to achieve it, they end up getting sidetracked by tiny little things. Tiny little things, tiny little things. When you get to see the movie Wrong Turn, literally explains this entire thing. All you need is to just be, taken by something too small, and then all of a sudden, chigenda chizimba, it builds up something else, and then you find that you're away from your main goal, from the main plot. And then you start having these small things that you have to deal with that are very immediate, before you realize, wait a minute, how did I get here? I was going this side. So that's, I don't know if it makes sense. I hope it does. But yeah, that's how you end up not having a very dragging second act. But as a writer, I also need to be mindful of all these tiny little subplots that you're creating for this character, to also sort of have a tiny little, almost invisible something that is connected to the main goal. If they're like, you're going to be a politician, and then you're like, yes, I'm going to be a politician, but I want to first address the issues of artists in the government. They'll be like, yeah, let's go with that. But obviously, it ends up not being that. And then you realize, I took money, but I don't know how to account for it. Now, your main issue becomes accounting for money, but not necessarily about being a politician. So those tiny little goals, and then at some point, they end up blowing up in your face, where you have to decide either you go back to what you wanted to do, or you just let life pass you by. So that's more or less the second act. That's how you try not to make it drag. Actually, I think the most exciting to write, because you're literally dealing with all the mess you created in the first and in the second act. The third act is the resolution. If it is extremely hard for you to write, say for example, you have a writer's block or whatever, just simple, get a piece of paper and read the first and second act, then point out all the things that you haven't resolved. All the things that you haven't resolved, the things that you know your character needed to do but hasn't done. All those things. But the stories that work best, that I see a lot of audiences receive, are the ones that have a good ending. A happy ending. And they lived happily ever after. They walk together into sunset. The damsel is saved by the Prince Charming. But audiences are very funny these days. The last film I produced, it was a short film. It had a very peculiar open ending. Why I say peculiar is that the ending was open-ended, and it was a story of this boy who is he's being raised by a single tyrant father. He's the kind of person who wants everything to work well for them. You have to be number one. In the long run, as the child keeps trying to meet the father's needs, he ends up losing himself, and he gets extremely scared. He can't go back home with these horrible marks. So the open ending was him writing a letter to his father saying, you were very pissed off. I don't know what you're going to do when you see my marks now, so I don't think I'm going to come back. What I did though is that the picture that was showing when we were editing this film was I put B-roll. Not necessarily us showing where the child is going, no. Just random B-roll of these children, because it was a child's film, children playing on set, the slate being all over the screen. But the message that was being heard in the air was so fascinating. And I remember the first time I showed it in a different country. When we were done showing the film, this woman walked to me, and she was like, oh my God. I can't believe Johnson, the main character, his name was Johnson. I can't believe Johnson committed suicide. I was like, what? She's like, yeah. So I did take that away from her, because to her, that is what the ending felt like. And then when I saw the film again, I was like, actually, that could be it, but that's not what it was, you know? So these characters are becoming to be very different. When you get to see Christopher Nolan's films, they're not necessarily the ones that give you a happy ending, because the truth of the matter is the happy ending, I don't know if there's anything as a happy ending in life. The happy ending is memento until you get another challenge and then you move on. So when we say happy ending, everyone's like, now we can't have happy endings all the time. So I see there's a lot of movies that keep coming up where the good guy ends up turning into a very nasty person. But there is obviously that element of good versus evil all the time. But evil can also be calculated in levels. There is someone who's like extremely evil, and then there's someone who needs evil to be taken over. It's complicated. The third act is where now you can decide either you want that happy, feel good, lucky, you know, like especially with rom-coms. I love rom-coms. They give you that image of what the world should be. And it's not cotton candy everywhere, but it doesn't hurt for you to just run there just for a little bit and get excited and then come back to reality tomorrow. So it depends. But yeah, the third act is all about resolutions, making sure your character gets their goal. There are movies where they don't get their goal. However, they learn a very important lesson and then you sort of see if they were in this same sort of situation that you just showed your audience, they would actually make better decisions. So it depends here and there. And it's also depending on the audience you're writing for. So how do I deal with the writer's block? I didn't know what a writer's block was until 2014, 16, 17, 18. That was one hell. Those 4 years were insane. But I guess it's because I was also busy doing... I got that second act moment where I was sidetracked into other things. And then by the time I was like, okay, now I want to go back. The writing world didn't want me anymore. Anyway, how I deal with writing blocks is that the one thing I learned, I was in secondary school, and one of my best, I had my two very best subjects were chemistry and art. But we reached a moment where we were like in an art class, and the teacher saw how tired we were, and she said something which I still hold dear up to now. In art, I would like to say in everything you do, well, apart from science, because I don't want you to be operating on me and you're like, I'm tired. No, is stop. When you're doing something and you reach that point where you're like, I can't, stop. Take a walk, do something that you rarely do, and then come back to it. If it's still the same, then just let it go. Start something else if you must. If it's a deadline, then you can figure out a few things on how you can overcome it. But what I learned, which has been working for me since then, because I think I've been writing since then non-stop every day, random things or things that end up on screen. I write a lot of unnecessary, uncoordinated things. I read a lot of books, scripts, news, whatever I can find, and then I watch. I made it mandatory ever since I decided now I am going to be a filmmaker, to make sure I watch something every night before I sleep. People pray, others meditate, the others do a lot of things, but I watch, even if it's one scene. Sometimes I actually even play an entire movie and then I sleep, and it sort of becomes like my lullaby while I sleep. The other thing that I think also helped me quite a lot were audiobooks. One of my favorite audiobooks is, it's called The Magic of Thinking Big. What I liked about it, it has an entire chapter about people making excuses or not being excellent. And the writer, David Schwartz, called it a disease called excusitis. And the way he explained, and it was an audiobook. If I got the book, I would read it, but it is an audiobook. It's actually on YouTube. Was so vivid that he'll be like, get your butt off that chair, go do something, make sure it is something that works for you, and then you see if it doesn't change your life. So those are some of the things I do, and I don't watch the same things. In that time, when I was having that very insane writer's block, is when I was introduced to Asian cinema, and that has changed my life. Those guys have a way, they make something as simple as me being as blind as a bat right now, and they turn that entire storyline into like the 16 most beautiful episodes you'll ever see, or just a movie. And it is just a girl who is blind meeting a guy who has sharp eyesight. Well, obviously, one is going to need the other, you know? So it's that for me opened my brain up so much, because the writer's block come in when you overthink. When you're like, I'm not writing a Wakanda piece, When you're like, I want this movie to be, you know, the best of the best. So when you keep putting pressure on yourself, the brain is going to stop working. So that's what I usually do. I write, I read, I watch. Constantly. Well, the writing exercises, for me personally, it depends on my mood. I would actually rather watch than write. Because then I feel like then it is also I used to do that. The first lessons that I got from some of the labs that we attended, that was the thing. We were told, even if it's rough or whatever, but I passed that information on. However, it worked for me when it did. Now it doesn't. Write anything random every day. Yeah, that's very good. If it works for people, that's amazing. But for me, my writing exercise is to watch people, watch movies, watch stuff. So I absorb more information so that when I reach the point where I need to write, then I have something in my head that I need to write about. So yeah, I do mostly watch and read. Then the writing comes last. So that when I sit and I write, because at the end of it, what I realized was also not very, that what wouldn't work with that was, then you'll find yourself at the end of the year, and you'd have like an entire folder of like over 200 tiny little things that you can't merge into one, which to me feels like wasted energy. So the exercise, it's simple. Get out of your house. I had to even get pets in my house for me to be able to see their mannerisms and how they relate with humans and stuff. Do something that takes you out of that space, because you see, writing is a very solitude activity. It is you, your brain, your computer, and these very many people in your head. So, and four walls. Because it's very rare where you'll find someone on the street writing. No, you will have a table, you're literally like in an office. However, unlike the desk clerk who will have a piece of information which is copying, putting into the system, you're getting everything from your head. So in order for me to get everything from my head, I need to put things in my head. So that means I have to watch, that means I have to read, I have to engage with a lot of people on different, levels. Traveling is a very good thing, because we have a saying in Luganda, I hope I say it right because I'm not a Muganda. It says kutambula kulaba. That I keep relating it to that scene in Lion King where I think it was Simba and Mufasa, where he says everything that touches the earth is yours. Then the next sequel, another animal with its parent is like, everything that touches the earth belongs to someone else. So you know that if everything that touches the earth from here is different from everything that touches the earth from where you are, So when you go out there and you explore all these different things, you get to realize that in Kampala or in Uganda, people sleep at midnight. When you go to places like TZ, in some places, by 6 p.m., everyone is in their houses. And I'll be like, wow, We were having a very funny conversation yesterday with my colleagues about culture and Buganda and how the king got his recent son. And I think that's the only son they count legitimate. And we were having this conversation with a Mnyaranda woman. And then this gentleman was like, so the girl asked, where did the king get this woman, And then the man explained, he was like, when he's in a crowd like this, all he needs to do is point. I like that one. And when that happens, and the king has picked you, you're like, thank you. It is an honor. The Munyaranda girl was like, sure, what if I'm not interested? You know, for her, that was insolence. How dare you? But then he further explained, he's like, even if he walked into my home and said, I like your wife, I will actually tell him, thank you, sir. It is an honor to serve you. And the Munyaranda woman wouldn't have it. Because that was the first time she has had it. Now, being around Baganda and she's working in the Buganda kingdom, those are things she's going to have to learn, and she will either be amazed by them or she'll be appalled, but you see, it sort of shows her something past what she knows. So if she had like that block around that, the more she keeps interacting with people in this tribe, the more she understands, and she's like, oh, so that's how they do their thing. I don't like it, but Mulanga, that's how they do it. So that was one of the ways you can even get rid of a writer's block, because you're like, so I have this woman and I need her to marry a king, but I don't know how to. And the answer is the king just says, you, I like you. But you don't know that that is something that could actually pass in a different community, because then those are the things that also make our stories international, where someone will watch a film here, enjoy it, and then someone will watch a film in the US and it's like, oh, I didn't know they do that, but I sort of like it, you know. The best conversations are so free and so easy, but then when you go into the English language, it's not just the English language actually, even these vernacular languages of ours, when you go to the literature part of it, they are insanely boring when it comes to dialogue. So for me, the best dialogue is the conversation I have with a friend and I see they're entertained, is the conversation someone tells me and I'm pulled in, irregardless of the fact that it has like 20 grammatic errors. Question is, have you understood what I'm trying to tell you? Have you, and if you interpret it wrong, then I'll be like, oh, maybe it is how I said it. So for me, that's the one thing that I actually always look out for, which is why now my people watching skills end up paying back, because people talk differently. People express themselves differently. Even if you were to have like, imagine you're writing a scene or you're watching a scene where there are two people. I think that happens a lot, especially with this a lot of migration with a man who is, say, for example, from South America, meeting a girl who is from like Thailand, and they're in love. And they'll tell you, we have been in love for over 6 years. But I saw something on TikTok. The father is Chinese, the mother is Spanish, and they have this child who, I guess, gets both of the languages. But the mother cannot speak Chinese for her, even if her life depended on it, and the father cannot speak Spanish. But they've been communicating for all these years, and the child looked like about 20, 23. How? Why do we have to just make sure we said no? So, if a character is not talking in their very easy, not having to think twice of what am I going to say, how am I going to say it, those are things we do when we're going for interviews. But even when you go for interviews and then you become that stiff, then you're sort of holding yourself back. So for me, the best dialogue is the one that you don't have to think twice saying. And if I write it and I read it, because now we have software that reads back to us, you'll see how it sounds stiff even when it's being read back to you. So then you'll add these tiny little things, you know, just people humming, or like the way we fuse our languages. There are things that we say that you can never explain. Things like, so now in our language we have ate, gwe, naye. Those tiny little things sort of make, the Kenyans have done it so perfectly. I like their sheng. I don't know for the love of myself what they even say. But when you hear their English, which is like a blend of English and Swahili, you're like, oh, okay, I like how that sounds. And then you'll ask, what was he saying in English? And they will tell you, and then the English version, trust me, you will be boring. So when you have these conversations, and you're having these conversations with the characters you're writing, you need to also like them. Then when you do, then there'll be dialogue that, in my opinion, is good dialogue. So if you have, say, for example, a dialogue-driven script, that's how I learned that from, there's a series called Newsroom. The first time I came across Newsroom, I watched the first scene, and I think it was a very long scene. I stopped because it was too wordy. And it was one character giving out monologue over monologue over monologue because it was like an interview. But then I gave it time when I was like free, and I needed to listen to all these things. And I think it's one of the things that taught me how to write good dialogue. Because then I realized when you listen, and there are those tiny little things they add that just when you're about to be bored, they throw something in that makes you either crack up or just, it evokes that emotion. And I was like, okay, so that's a trick. And it's something that I've been trying to do. And I think it's been working quite well for my audiences. There's something I learned. I found I was already doing, but I guess I didn't know why until I listened to it in that audiobook that I was talking about, The Magic of Thinking Big. Put service first, and everything will follow. If I'm not passionate about a project, I'll not do it, because I'm going to reach somewhere where they'll be like, deadline. I'll be like, you know what? Here's your thing. Because like I said, we are deriving everything that we are writing from in here, even if it's someone else's work. So I need to love this someone else's work. And unfortunately, I'm not one of those people who will be like, this guy is paying me 10 million shillings. I have to deliver. No. Even if it's 200 million shillings and the passion is not there, I'll deliver haphazard work. And whether it's my work or it is someone else's work, provided it has my name somewhere, even if it's in tiny little letters, I have to give it my 100. So I've not really had those challenges. I also can see, I've been blessed with the foresight. I can see when a job is going to work out or not before I even start. So, and this comes from like these engagements. I'll have a conversation with someone, and then how this reciprocates, how they talk to you, sort of gives you that feel for me that I am working with someone, not for someone. Because then when you're working for someone, there's that, I don't know what they call it. It's like you're being talked over, and yet we're in an industry where you're sharing information. You say, no, I want this. And I'm like, yeah, you'd want this, but this might not work like this. And so we share things back and forth. But then when it starts becoming a job, then I know it's my time to leave. That's the truth of the matter. And even if I try, I will deliver, which is unfortunately what most of the people do in our arts industry. I would rather tell you, this is not going to work before it starts, than having to go in there with one foot and then right in the middle of the job, I have to withdraw, because then you're leaving the other person really hanging. So the passion has to be there. For me, that's like the underlying factor. And how is it going to change my life, even if it's not my job? How is it going to change my life, or the things I'm very passionate about, even if it's not my work? So I would proudly want to work on things that I would like to stand up when I am 80 and I'm like, yeah, I was actually part of that job. But I'm not going to do that if all I was looking at was the check, or if all I was looking at was, we call it the gig mentality. I have a gig. When it's a gig, then it's you are more in a hurry to finish it without the consequences of how you've finished it, how good it looks, how it represents who you are, or the people that you're maybe trying to talk about, or So for me, that's the thing. Whether it's my job, whether it's a passion project. And I try to exercise that, because my first time in the industry, I would only work on my own stories, my own scripts, my own everything. But then I reached a point where I was like, I need to teach myself how to work on other people's projects, but still give it my 100. So I sent out for these scripts. This film that I was talking about, which has a very open-ended story, it wasn't written by me. It was written by a student in Makerere. I made a call for short films, and I remember I received like about 13 scripts, and then this ended up being the one good one, and it was because I was allowed to have conversations with this student on how we can make his script better, and then obviously I ended up producing it. And then that was for me the beginning of working on something that is not solely mine, and I still love that. Up to now, I write. I'm a very good writer, but I have met very good writers who now I'm trying to also figure out how to do that. So I come up with concepts, then commission them to write. And then we will go through the stories together. Because at the end of it all, I think I've reached a point where I get more fulfilled when I pass on information. So when you write things like this and then I go through them with you, it's like my opportunity to pass on whatever it is that I have that I think you might need for later. Because I don't want to be the only best writer we had in the country, and then all of a sudden I'm hit by a truck and we don't have writers. That's just ridiculous. Which is what is happening a lot. A lot of people are losing their businesses because we have failed to pass on information to the next generation, to the younger generations, because they are the ones who are going to keep this storytelling styles and even introduce other new things, because they're experiencing different lives differently. So yeah, everything that I do, whether it's my work or it's someone else's work, passion has to come first. And if I don't like it, we always know, even when you're going in a relationship, you will know it's not going to work, but we still go. And then 5 years later, you're like, actually, I didn't want to get married. I just didn't want to lose you. But, you know, so we always know at the beginning, even with work, we always know, you're like, this is not going to work, but I'm just going to do it anyway. I have a small problem, which is going to cost me sentence you know, but when you put your foot in and you've finished achieving that tiny little immediate goal, then you leave your friends hanging. So yeah, for me, that's the base. Put service first and everything will follow. My first writing experience was with Celtics. First off, because it's free, and it was very user-friendly. It was very easy to learn. Then I went a bit to Final Draft, but then Final Draft is very expensive. Final Draft is extremely expensive. But I love the fact that it can read back. That was amazing. For me, that's a game changer. But then a few years ago, I was introduced to another software called Kit Scenarist. It has a dark and a lighter theme. And the dark theme, for me, took me back to the time when I just learned computer. Where the first time I learned computer, we were using what no one will ever understand now if they're in this age, called command prompt. So it felt like you're cracking some codes, and you know, so that I loved a lot. And then obviously because of my site, it worked perfectly for me. So, and yeah, I've been using that since then. I've been at it for, I think, more than 12, 13, around 15 years. I do part-time teaching. I teach at a university, script writing. My biggest passion is actually writing. I write, I direct, I produce. I have worked a lot as an AD, an assistant director, an acting coach. I'm a jack of all trades, really. I'm a single mom of two very, very beautiful girls.